October 1st, 331 BCE. The plains of Gaugamela stretch flat and wide under a copper sky, dust hanging in the still air like smoke from distant fires. 47,000 Macedonians face 250,000 Persians across ground chosen for slaughter. But the mathematics of war do not always follow the mathematics of arithmetic. This is the story of how Alexander turned impossible odds into empire-breaking victory through one perfect strike at the right moment. To understand how so few shattered so many, you must first understand what Darius III had built. The Persian king commanded the largest army ever assembled in the ancient world, drawn from 24 provinces stretching from India to Egypt. Scythed chariots waited in formation, their wheels fitted with spinning blades designed to harvest infantry like wheat. 200 war elephants trumpeted behind ranks of immortals, whose ancestors had conquered Babylon and humbled Sparta. The young Macedonian king had marched 3,000 miles from home to meet this host, his men outnumbered more than 5 to 1. Every advantage belonged to Persia except one, and that exception would rewrite the map of the known world. The numbers that echo through history tell a story, but not the whole truth. Ancient sources claim Darius commanded 1,000,000 men at Gaugamela, a figure that would stretch across 20 miles of front. Modern estimates place his army closer to 250,000, still massive by any measure, still impossible odds for Alexander's compact force. People tell this tale as swift conquest, destiny unfolding for a god-born king. The truth walks on muddied boots through 3 years of grinding campaigns. Alexander had already shattered Persian armies at Granicus and Issus, but each victory pushed him deeper into hostile territory while Darius rebuilt his strength. The Persian king had learned from defeat, abandoning mountain passes and river crossings where terrain favored smaller forces. This time, Darius chose the ground. The plain near Gaugamela offered everything the Persian commander needed. Flat earth for his cavalry wings, clear sightlines for coordination, space to deploy his numerical advantage without crowding. Engineers had spent months smoothing the field, removing stones and obstacles that might trip charging horses or chariots. Darius had even scattered caltrops and hidden pits beyond his flanks to channel Alexander's movement. The Persian king understood his enemy now. Alexander was not reckless, he was calculating. Every charge carried purpose, every risk served strategy. At Issus, the Macedonian had targeted Darius personally, forcing the king to flee and abandoning his army to collapse. This time, Darius positioned himself deep in the center, surrounded by his best troops, protected by distance and density. But Alexander had learned too. As October dawned over the dusty plain, his formation moved with new purpose. The Macedonian king was no longer fighting Persian armies, he was hunting the Persian Empire itself. And empires, like armies, break at their weakest point. Darius had built his army like a fortress, layers of strength defending the royal center where golden standards marked the great king's position. The front bristled with 200 scythed chariots, their bronze-fitted wheels designed to carve through packed infantry formations. Behind them stood 15,000 immortals in scale armor, the elite guard whose ranks never diminished because fallen warriors were instantly replaced. The wings stretched beyond sight. Bactrian cavalry held the right, their horses bred for endurance on the steppes where Alexander had never campaigned. Scythian mounted archers commanded the left, masters of the feigned retreat who could fire backwards at full gallop. Between these mobile hammers, Greek mercenary hoplites formed a wall of bronze and iron, men who knew Macedonian tactics because they had once fought beside them. War elephants waited in reserve, towers of muscle and ivory that could crush formations and terrify horses unused to their trumpeting. The Persian king had even recruited Indian chariots fitted with 4-horse teams, vehicles that moved like thunderstorms across level ground. Every piece of this vast machine was positioned to exploit Macedonian weakness. Alexander's phalanx excelled in close combat, but required time to close distance. His cavalry struck hard but lacked the numbers for sustained fighting. His army moved as one organism, fast and flexible, but that unity became vulnerability when stretched across a front built for giants. Darius had learned the lessons of Issus well. No rivers to anchor flanks, no hills to disrupt his deployment, no terrain tricks to even the odds. just mathematics and muscle, weight of numbers applied to open ground where Macedonian brilliance would meet Persian mass. If formation decides everything, why do the watching ravens already circle overhead, as if they know something both kings have missed? Dawn breaks over 47,000 men who should not be here. Alexander's army forms in the half-light, each unit moving to positions rehearsed through years of shared campaign. The phalanx takes center, 18,000 sarissa spears creating a forest of bronze-tipped ashwood. Companion cavalry masses on the right wing, their horses stamping and snorting in the cool air. But this formation looks different. Instead of the tight, compressed wedge that shattered armies at Granicus and Issus, the Macedonian line stretches thin and angular. Alexander has refused his left flank, pulling it back like a bent bow while advancing his right forward. The oblique formation creates gaps, spaces that seem to invite Persian penetration. His generals question the deployment. Parmenion commands the left wing and sees only weakness in the extended line. The veteran officer sends word to his king, warning that the flank cannot hold against massed cavalry. Alexander's reply comes back terse and cryptic. "Let them come." The young king rides along his formation as Persian trumpets sound across the plain. 25 years old, master of Greece, conqueror of Asia Minor, he carries the weight of empire on shoulders that still remember boyhood training under Aristotle. His men watch him pass and see something new in his bearing, not the eager aggression of earlier battles, but cold calculation. The Persians begin their advance, a wave of bronze and iron rolling across prepared ground. Scythed chariots lead the charge, drivers whipping their teams toward the thin Macedonian line. Dust clouds rise behind them as 250,000 men follow, the largest army ever assembled moving as one toward what looks like certain victory. Alexander raises his spear and the trap begins to unfold. The scythed chariots hit first, 200 vehicles thundering toward the Macedonian center with wheels spinning death. But Alexander's men do not break or bunch together as expected. Instead, they open corridors in their formation, channeling the charging vehicles into predetermined lanes where javelin men wait in carefully prepared positions. Bronze-tipped spears pierce horseflesh and driver alike. Chariots that survive the gauntlet find themselves isolated behind Macedonian lines, their momentum spent, their terror factor dissolved. Some vehicles career wildly through the gaps, only to crash against the second phalanx line, their wheels catching in sarissa points like fish in nets. On the Persian left, Scythian cavalry sweeps around the Macedonian right flank, exactly as Alexander intended. His refused formation draws them forward into what appears to be an envelopment opportunity. Darius watches from his command position and sees his plan working, enemy flanks bending under pressure, gaps widening in the thin line. But the gaps are not breaking points, they are channels. Alexander has created deliberate weakness to funnel Persian strength into killing zones. His light troops, Agrionians and Thracians, pour javelin fire into the advancing cavalry while falling back in controlled retreat. The Scythians pursue what they believe is victory, pushing deeper into Macedonian territory. Then the weather turns. Not wind or rain, but the weather of battle itself. Persian momentum carries their best units too far forward, stretching their own formation thin. The numerical advantage that looked overwhelming moments before becomes a coordination nightmare as dust clouds obscure signals and separate formations lose contact with central command. Alexander sees the moment approaching and moves his horse to the exact position he has planned for months. The Persian center has committed its reserves to support the flanking attacks. A gap opens in their formation, narrow but deep enough for what comes next. Alexander forms the companion cavalry into a wedge, 3,000 horsemen arranged in a diamond formation, with the king at its tip. This is the weapon he has carried across Asia, the hammer that broke armies at Granicus and Issus. But now it aims at something larger than victory. It targets the heart of an empire. The wedge begins its charge not toward the Persian flanks where tradition demands, but straight into the center where Darius commands. Bronze armor gleams as the formation gathers speed, each rider's spear angled forward in perfect alignment. The thunder of 6,000 hooves drowns out the battle noise around them. Persian reserves rush to close the gap, but they arrive piecemeal, individual units stumbling into the path of organized destruction. The companion wedge cuts through Bactrian cavalry like an axe through green wood. Men and horses go down in tangled heaps as the Macedonian formation maintains its disciplined shape even at full gallop. Behind the cavalry charge, the phalanx advances with mechanical precision, 18,000 sarissa points lower in unison, creating a moving wall of bronze-tipped death. The Persian center, weakened by units sent to support the flanks, cannot match this coordinated assault. Greek mercenaries fighting for Darius find themselves facing the very tactics they once practiced, but now perfected beyond their recognition. Alexander himself leads the charge, his white-plumed helmet visible above the dust and chaos. This is not the reckless bravery of youth, but the calculated risk of genius. Every stride of his horse Bucephalus carries him closer to Darius, closer to the moment that will decide not just this battle, but the fate of 2 continents. The Persian king sees death approaching in Macedonian armor and makes the choice that ends his empire. Darius turns his chariot and flees the field, abandoning his army to save his life. The great king's flight ripples through the Persian ranks like cracks spreading through marble. Royal standards disappear from the center as Darius's chariot wheels toward distant safety, dust marking his retreat across the plain. The immortals, elite guards sworn to die before their king, watch their sacred duty dissolve into meaningless oaths. First the center wavers, then it bends. Finally it snaps. Units that held formation under cavalry charges break when they see golden banners streaming away from battle. Persian commanders shout orders that no longer carry weight, their authority evaporating with the royal presence that gave it meaning. The collapse feeds on itself. Bactrian cavalry, still fighting effectively on the wings, receive word of the king's departure and begin their own withdrawal. Scythian archers, masters of tactical retreat, now retreat in earnest, their feigned flights becoming genuine panic. Even the war elephants, those towers of trained destruction, lumber away from a field where victory has turned to rout. Alexander does not pause to savor the moment. His wedge formation wheels and strikes again, this time targeting the fleeing Persian reserves. Companion cavalry cuts down officers and standard bearers, eliminating the command structure that might rally resistance. The phalanx advances methodically, its bronze wall pushing forward over ground littered with abandoned weapons and Persian dead. But victory carries its own momentum, dangerous and intoxicating. Macedonian units begin to spread across the field in pursuit of fleeing enemies, their tight formations dissolving into individual hunts for glory and plunder. Alexander sees his disciplined army fragmenting and faces a choice that separates great generals from merely successful ones. He sounds the recall. The pursuit stops, the formation reforms, and 47,000 men who could have chased glory choose instead to secure conquest. The field at Gaugamela tells its own story in bodies and broken bronze. Macedonian casualties number in the hundreds, men cut down by Persian cavalry or trampled in the chariot charge. Each loss weighs heavy because Alexander's army cannot replace its dead the way Darius replaced his immortals. These are veterans who learned war alongside their king, irreplaceable masters of coordinated violence. Persian losses stretch beyond counting. Ancient sources claim 100,000 dead. Modern estimates place the number lower but still catastrophic. Entire units vanished during the rout, scattered across miles of plain where pursuit cavalry found them isolated and defenseless. The survivors carry wounds deeper than bronze or iron, the knowledge that their empire's greatest army died in a single afternoon. Alexander moves through the aftermath with the methodical care that marks all his campaigns. Wounded Macedonians receive attention first, Persian prisoners are gathered and catalogued, abandoned equipment is sorted and distributed. Victory brings logistics, not celebration, and the king understands that conquest means administration as much as combat. The spoils boggle comprehension. Darius's camp yields the accumulated wealth of 24 provinces, gold and silver worked into forms that Macedonian craftsmen have never imagined. Royal furniture, ceremonial weapons, even the great king's personal chariot become trophies of a war that started as a border dispute and became a civilizational shift. But the real prize is not treasure, it is time. Darius's flight means no organized Persian resistance can form for months, maybe years. The road to Babylon lies open, the road to Persepolis stands unguarded. Alexander has not just won a battle, he has purchased the space to build an empire from the wreckage of another. Still, as night falls over the plain, the king stares eastward where Darius fled. Empires are not conquered in single battles, and the Persian king still lives to fight again. news of Gaugamela travels faster than Alexander's army, carried by merchants and messengers across the Persian road system that once bound an empire together. In Babylon, the satrap opens his gates without siege. In Susa, the royal treasury surrenders its contents to Macedonian guards. Across 24 provinces, local governors face a choice between resistance and accommodation. Most choose survival. The Persian Empire does not die in a single moment, but bleeds out through 1,000 small surrenders. Garrisons abandon their posts. Tax collectors stop sending tribute to a king who might already be dead. Provincial armies melt away as soldiers return to farms and families. What Cyrus built and Darius inherited crumbles not through conquest but through the simple recognition that power has shifted. Alexander becomes something new, not just a foreign conqueror but the inheritor of Persian legitimacy. He adopts royal ceremonies, appoints Persian administrators, even begins wearing the dress of Asian kingship. His Macedonian veterans grumble at these changes, but they misunderstand their king's purpose. Alexander is not becoming Persian, he is becoming universal. The strategic mathematics are stark. Before Gaugamela, Alexander commanded 47,000 men in hostile territory, thousands of miles from home. After the battle, he rules millions of subjects across the largest empire in human history. The victory has transformed a brilliant raider into the master of civilizations. Darius still lives, still claims the throne, but his authority exists only where his person commands direct loyalty. The great king has become a refugee in his own empire, dependent on the hospitality of distant satraps who calculate daily whether their future lies with a fugitive Persian or a victorious Macedonian. The ancient world has tilted on its axis, and gravity now pulls toward a 25-year-old king who turned impossible odds into inevitable conquest. How do 47,000 men demolish 250,000? The answer lies not in divine favor or destined victory, but in the precise application of disciplined violence at the moment when numerical advantage becomes coordination weakness. Alexander did not win through superior courage or better weapons. His victory came from understanding that large armies carry large vulnerabilities. Every additional unit requires more complex communication. Every extended formation creates more potential breaking points. Every numerical advantage demands more sophisticated control. Darius commanded 250,000 men, but he could not command them as one. The Macedonian formation worked like a surgeon's blade, creating small wounds that became fatal hemorrhages. The refused left flank drew Persian strength away from the center. The deliberate gaps channeled enemy momentum into killing zones. The cavalry wedge struck not where resistance was weakest, but where collapse would spread fastest. Alexander fought the battle Darius gave him, then turned Persian advantages into Persian disasters. Military genius reveals itself not in dramatic gestures, but in mundane preparation made perfect. The oblique advance, the coordinated retreat, the precision timing of the final charge all required years of training and absolute trust between commander and commanded. Alexander's men did not follow him because he was Alexander. Alexander succeeded because his men would follow. This was not a story of the few overcoming the many through miraculous intervention. It became a story of discipline defeating numbers, coordination conquering mass, and tactical intelligence turning mathematical impossibility into strategic inevitability. The lesson echoes through every military academy that studies the ancient world. Size matters, but organization matters more. At Gaugamela, 47,000 Macedonians proved that in war, as in mathematics, the right equation always produces the correct answer. 2,300 years later, military academies still teach the Battle of Gaugamela as the perfect example of tactical genius overcoming impossible odds. Staff colleges from West Point to Sandhurst dissect Alexander's oblique formation, his use of deliberate gaps, his timing of the decisive cavalry strike. The lessons translate across centuries because the fundamentals of command remain constant. Coordination defeats confusion, discipline conquers numbers, and the right decision at the right moment changes history. But Gaugamela's deepest legacy lives not in textbooks but in the precedent it established. Before Alexander, empires grew through gradual expansion, cultural absorption, and administrative evolution. After Gaugamela, conquest became a tool of instant transformation. One battle could topple civilizations, one victory could redraw the map of continents. One young king could inherit the accumulated power of millennia. The Persian Empire never recovered from that October afternoon on the plains of northern Iraq. Darius died 3 years later, assassinated by his own satraps who finally recognized that accommodation with Alexander offered better prospects than loyalty to a fugitive king. The Achaemenid dynasty, which had ruled from India to Egypt for 2 centuries, vanished into the footnotes of history. Alexander lived only 8 more years after Gaugamela, dying in Babylon at 32 with no clear heir and an empire too vast for any single successor to hold. But the idea he proved on that dusty plain survived. That military genius, applied at the perfect moment, could overcome any odds and achieve any goal. In the end, Gaugamela demonstrated something more profound than tactical brilliance. It showed that history belongs not to the largest armies or the richest treasuries, but to those who understand that the impossible becomes inevitable when mathematics serves vision.